contemplative segues to responsible citizenship in the United States of consciousness and change, reflected in 12 interlacing stanzas of a sermon for voting to elect peace. To elect peace. Hello, and thanks for spending time with me to focus and concentrate our attention on voting to elect peace in the United States of consciousness and change. I am Reverend Gola Wolfe Richards from BroadcastWisdom.com. In the year 2024, I am 78 years old, and I firmly believe that luck works in tandem with how reasoning for humane outcomes evokes and evolves holistic dynamics of universal creativity. In other words, I believe that as individuals actualize timely moral ideals, progressive character development evokes and evolves global dynamics, reflecting how our personal walks through life evoke and evolve transpersonal pathways paved with principles and practices for the future to collectively survive the past, based on the spiritual competencies of majestic human development. What I am saying then is that I believe in the practical magic involved in what may be called mystical humanism, or how through reciprocity between sage character development and the evolution of collective change, faith in peace is wise to contemplate, whether it is cloaked in an ancient fantasy or implied through conversations between subatomic theories in physics and ancient concepts of how the Tao of the universe unfolds on the way to better days to come. On the way to better days to come, then, for the better part of the next hour, thanks for taking contemplative time for us to think together so as to begin to save the future today from how in the year 2024 we are heavily challenged by philosophic and psychological impediments on the road to global conflict resolution. Therefore, based on a timeless ancient orientation for evolving global conflict resolution, I teach timely concepts for transforming ourselves as individuals so as to evoke and evolve reciprocal dynamics for positively changing the world. This ancient concept is called yin-yang philosophy and psychology of consciousness and change. And what it suggests is that world peace is evoked and evolved, consequent to how sage self-governance is reciprocally and integrally interlaced with all the spiritual and material dynamics that are involved in the United States of consciousness and change. Therefore, to facilitate peace, based on learning to magnify cosmic order over disorder, this contemplative sermon concerns yin-yang philosophy and psychology of consciousness and change, and how through universal reciprocity between contrasting dimensions of consciousness and change. Sage self-cultivation functions as a fountainhead for collectively aggregating, integrating, and centrally orchestrating how in human nature, Mother Nature's creativity functions through sage character development, so as to co-create interlacing dynamics for cultivating positive, transformative reactions to destruction. Therefore, with profound faith in our spiritual potentials to augment healthful social and material outcomes, this sermon is offered to help individuals to progressively exceed inadequate holistic understanding regarding the full range of the effects that our perspectives and personalities have, whereby we are always evoking and evolving intended and unintended central effects on how universal dynamics of creativity and or destruction act to encircle the earth. Therefore, without timely education for majestic human development in 2024 and further along the way, our historic addictions to untimely personal and collective reactions to conflict will continue to function as votes to elect extinction into office. Consequent to how the truth is that without holistic self-leadership, even wrong directions can seem right to follow. Once in a while, from time to time, we hear it said that misery loves company. But likewise in 2024, it would seem that the same could be said about deception. Therefore, for us to learn contemporary values for an ancient spiritual orientation to truth, the best time and place to begin the project of learning so as to save the future from the past is right now, wherever we may be today, hopefully blessed with enough safe space so as to focus on the role that education plays, consequent to how it constructs fundamental concepts and all subsequent ways that we become accustomed to seeing, feeling, and thinking as we do about who we are and what we mean as influences on ourselves, and as well, how everything on earth is currently subject to the consequences of human development at large. With those ideas in mind, a key point to this contemplative sermon is that it is crucial to realize that the origin to all facts, fantasies, conjectures, hunches, or opinions regarding any man, woman, child, dog, cat, love, hate, personal, public, social, religious, science, or political issue is the same, which is that universal principles of creation and destruction reciprocally form the contents and the container of the spiritual and material nature of the United States of consciousness and change. Therefore, in order to augment authentic civilization, what we learn from how Mother Nature functions in human nature is that change sustains positive and negative reciprocal ties between all contrasting dimensions, qualities, and features of life, and thereby, in order to evoke and evolve all the dynamic underpinnings to global conflict resolution, contrasting bonds between practical and mystical dimensions of character development are fundamental to how reciprocity between sage self-cultivation among individuals and collective evolution for global conflict resolution is nature's basis. For individuals, learning to evolve and sustain the world in peace. Therefore, consequent to how complementary relationships exist between contrasting dimensions of change, despite chaos all around the world, in order to save the future from the past, I wrote this contemplative sermon in the form of 12 symbolic and somewhat poetic stanzas, aiming to enjoin and grow a critical number of contemplators into forming a transformative tipping point in history based on holistic contemplative education involving reflections and discussions concerning all the ups and downs in human development, being conceived in terms of ancient yin-yang philosophy and psychology of universal reciprocity, which in other words is what can be seen deep within or arching over any one of all life's scenes. Once upon a time, in order for individuals to learn to save the future at large from how the past resides in us today, what is true as opposed to being deceptive is that the dynamics of universal reciprocity pertain to us as individuals and ourselves collectively. Likewise, we are complementary reciprocal reflections and interactions of all the powers and potentials of the United States of consciousness and change. Thereby, in concert with yin-yang reciprocity throughout the cosmos, all potentials for achieving global conflict resolution reciprocally depend on individuals, learning to manifest holistic alignment within the integral nature of human development at large. With that idea in mind, each stanza of this contemplative sermon promotes the concept that every decision or attitude that we may have is, in a sense, a vote. And thereby, just as in politics, we are always consciously or unconsciously electing creative or destructive powers that tend toward or away from ethically mature resolutions to conflicts. Therefore, as life is a story about essential maturity, depending on essential education, all historic constraints on peace are imposed through arrested stages of infantile or adolescent human development. Yet in contrast, the cosmic origins of history are likewise alive and well today, inherent in how our personal perspectives enact transpersonal dynamics, of how universal creativity makes timely changes so as to defy untimely destruction, and thereby, consequent to individuals being transpersonal agents of collective dynamics of change. The nature of yin-yang reciprocity between creation and destruction is inherent in every dimension of our decisions, and thereby in every vote that we make to elect anything or anyone in particular. Some element of a creative, destructive, holistically aligned, or haplessly misaligned tendency always promotes or defies the progressive dynamics of the profound wisdom that humanity needs to evolve and govern how all the powers and potentials of the United States of consciousness and change respond in concert with how the character of everything that we consciously or unconsciously think or feel is always voting, as it were, for the attributes of heaven or hell to shape war or peace into current ways that the future is destined to thrive or suffer, consequent to whether or not compassionate action or the neglect of holistic human development is involved, and how the character of our moral strengths work to transform the character of our moral inadequacies. As this concerns democracy in the year 2024 and further along the way in the United States of consciousness and change, inasmuch as the effects of the ideas that we elect to believe constitute votes, global citizens are always electing for life to be governed in an epic moral drama that enacts how the evolution of wisdom depends on holistic self-cultivation, in contrast to how hell expands, consequent to decisions that are made from immature and untimely orientations to conflict resolution, whereby arrested stages in human development misalign with the ideals that humanity needs to survive in peace. Therefore, within the context of how well or not we cultivate ourselves to evolve global conflict resolution, to elect wisdom to grow requires votes for self-examination, looking for any thoughts, feelings, or motivations rooted in arrested stages of human development, which have nothing more going for them than to channel more chaos into the United States of consciousness and change. From that point of view, I find wisdom in a timely echo from centuries ago, when William Blake said that, quote, "This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole and leads you to believe a lie when you see with, not through, the eye." The first of 12 stanzas in this sermon for peace in the United States of consciousness and change says, "Once upon a time, due to growing numbers of us learning to function beyond infantile and adolescent phases in psychology, humanity is reciprocally destined to learn how to evoke, evolve, and sustain peace as the central focus of authentic civilization in the United States of consciousness and change, where dynamics of universal chaos easily promote arrested stages in human development, to thwart how mature self-cultivation is the essential reciprocal route to how mystical dimensions of consciousness evoke and evolve change toward global conflict resolution, based on how we personally respond to each one of all the challenges that we may face. Therefore, as history in the United States of consciousness and change unfolds in 2024, it is wise to notice that wherever the character of an arrested stage of human development leads any political or social endeavor, hell grows consequent to how immature human development takes advantage of common vulnerabilities. For confusion and deception being packaged to be accepted as clarity, or emotions being manipulated so as to undercut the quality of what global citizens actually understand, especially at times such as nowadays, when anyone's addiction to a self-involved custom, narrow-minded tradition, or undignified orientation to life runs the risk of unconsciously, haplessly, innocently, or inadvertently doing hell's biddings, simply based on the roles that our immature, untimely, and inadequate orientations play regarding how long before and after 2024, as the spiritual nature of the universe resides in human nature. Principles of universal creativity and destruction shape our perspectives so as to serve, underserve, align, or misalign with the range of meanings that we all enact within the holistic nature of the United States of consciousness and change, where we are always on the way to being lost or well-founded within universal ways that wisdom's responses to chaos evoke, evolve, integrate, and sustain multi-dimensional phases of integral progress toward global conflict resolution. The second of 12 Stanzas for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, "Once upon a time today, imagine the character of better days to come, contemplating how we learned to save ourselves collectively from ourselves as individuals. Perhaps what the future in peace knows about our current challenges in 2024 is that not only is deception antithetical to the truth, it also thrives on lies being widely shared, so as to deny room for the wisdom that democracy needs, for our mature reactions to history to evolve global conflict resolution. Therefore, in the contest between the better angels of human nature and the nature of how confusion can bedevil every dimension of society, we are always moving toward or resisting how holistic self-cultivation transforms unconscious limitations to authentic morality, whereby, by means of decisive uses of our acute sensitivities, a practical reflection of mature human development is to vote to assume responsibility for electing to protect the world from how all forms of spiritual and material destruction flow from personal and political leadership, mired in how arrested stages of human development are morally inadequate for performing the spiritual difficulties involved in changing ourselves so as to reciprocally lead the world through the love of God being expressed as the love of wisdom, reflecting how sage or wholly holistic self-cultivation is the central creative reciprocal way that the nature of the universe acts through human nature so as to evoke, integrate, and sustain every near or distant practical feature of change involved in the evolution of world peace. The third of 12 stanzas of the Sermon for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, "Once upon a time, better days to come were contemplated in ancient imaginations about nature's profound creativity in human nature, and found that it is critical to conceive of reciprocity between practical and mystical dimensions of nature and human nature, functioning in unison like symbolic reflections of how yin-yang principles of creation and destruction evoke and evolve all powers, to positively alter and magnify the meaning of our individual contributions to human development at large, reflecting the role that cosmic creativity plays through virtuous human development, so as to integrate and sustain multiple dimensions of how timely human developments concentrate timeless orientations to moral creativity in our perspectives, such that through reciprocity between contrasting dimensions of life, every interactive dynamic needed to evolve world peace stems from learning to save history from how the neglect of majestic human development within ourselves as individuals promotes regretful human development at large. Thereby, whether the evolution of heaven on earth is conceived to be a fact or a fantasy, the truth is anchored or adrift in the principles that reside in our perspectives. Therefore, to help history rise through the power of moral inspiration, individuals must not fall, consequent to allowing our imaginations to die, consequent to any arrested stage in human development. Thereby, through timely moral imagination, since every choice or attitude that we have is a vote that affects the entire world, as we elect to understand ourselves as micro-functions of macro effects on life, the transpersonal dynamics of our personal decisions begin to be appropriately oriented, so as to wisely choose between principles for heaven or hell to govern the biosphere, all based on the roles that we as individuals play, not for ourselves alone, but for the world. The fourth of 12 stanzas for peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, "Once upon a time, as one passing element of the enduring nature of change, in the year 2024, I am 78 years old, and to offset mounting levels of chaos, this contemplative sermon is offered to secure hopes for the evolution of critical change, based on learning from listening to contemplative audio, offer to uphold the idea that majestic human development for global conflict resolution depends on spiritual health, based on timely education about timeless universal principles pertaining to the philosophic and psychological nature of the United States of consciousness and change, and how by means of profound concepts for sage self-cultivation, individuals are central critical agents of how the mystical dynamics of change are ever-present roots to how wisdom is always working to practically overcome, how wars and all social maladies stem from choices that are not actually conscious decisions, but unconscious habitual reflexes, made consequent to the history of humanity being mired in widespread orientations to politics, economics, and forms of personal and collective identities that reflect how resistance to timely change promotes untimely dynamics, of how arrested stages in human development are unaligned and out of sync with how the universe maintains balance between contrasting dimensions of change. With that in mind, this contemplative sermon is about yin-yang philosophy and psychology of consciousness and change, which in the ancient Book of Changes is a spiritual theory for putting peace into practice, based on highlighting the role that universal reciprocity plays between nature and human nature, whereby in concert with how nature's cosmic principle of creativity transforms universal manifestations of chaos through sage character development among individuals. The dynamics of the cosmos enfold every dimension of our direct, indirect, and synchronistic influences into wholly holistic processes for evoking multiple dimensions of integrally related progressive steps toward genuine civilization, flourishing consequent to individuals assuming personal responsibility for voting to elect to evoke transpersonal dynamics of how profound maturity augments practical collective change through mystical humanism, reflecting how the practical worth of the mythic powers in our perspectives is to align ourselves as individuals within ourselves as cosmic agents of change. This contemplative sermon, then, concerns the timeless idea that every vote we make to elect the better angels of human nature into leadership is ethically imperative for drawing the world away from how dysfunctional political personalities capitalize on fomenting educational neglect for learning the way to see whole. The fifth of 12 Stanzas for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, once upon a time, from the perspective of better days to come, so as not to expand the dominion of hell through habitual social and political misperceptions. The subject of this contemplative sermon concerns how all the challenges that we face occur in terms of dramas, performed by means of how universal principles of creation and destruction reside in every aspect of how The United States of consciousness and change constitutes one intimate story, told in chapters, where individuals risk becoming estranged from how essential unity and harmony depends on seeing ourselves in all others and learning to feel the feelings of other folks and things within ourselves, despite habitually thinking of ourselves as being relatively powerless, in contrast to all the collective powers of the universe, where by means of universal reciprocity, all contrasting forms of existence are always reciprocally affected by how our personal decisions have transpersonal impacts on the holistic, integral nature of how the moral direction of collective change depends on the character of our personalities as individuals, concerning whether or not we are learning to become holistically aligned within comprehensive dynamics of how life under the dominion of authentic wisdom grows toward peace, consequent to how intelligence in service to love is a wholly holistic function of how the principle of universal creativity works to set us free from the history of how our chronic social dysfunctions are all due to arrested stages in human development, functioning as unconscious agents, of how the attributes of hell engage in destruction, characterized by compassion being constricted to the point that human decency is regularly undercut by not honoring how life transcends and depends on different similarities between ourselves and others. In contrast, by means of our wholly holistic reactions to history, all the powers and potentials of universal change reciprocally begin to release our imaginations from the restrictions involved in how ignorance seduces intelligence into having no interest in learning the way to see whole. The sixth of 12 stanzas in this sermon for peace in the United States of consciousness and change says, once upon a time nowadays, from the perspective of better days to come, sage character development is how mystical potentials of change become practical reciprocal roots to conjuring universal dynamics for conflict resolution, such as when moral clarity sympathizes with the psychology of how chronic worldwide misperceptions are based on historic deficits, reflecting how the meaning of human development becomes lost without it being contemplated in terms of universal principles regarding the role that universal reciprocity plays in the holistic nature of consciousness and change. And moreover, for the sake of better days to come, no matter how sincerely we may attempt to influence or teach others, nobility in the character of genuine morality is only achieved through remaining humble enough to leave room for possibly being mistaken in the pursuit of absolutely wanting to be right. Thereby, if we watch for the mistakes that we may make in attempting to highlight the mistakes of others, carefully standing apart from arrogance is key to any authentic act of moral clarity, especially when the folks that we choose to criticize are outside the company that we like to keep. where we may erroneously identify with the idea that whatever we feel is right. So much so that hate and indifference can carelessly and easily occupy any space in our hearts, where differences foment divisions, particularly at times when we flirt with any one of many dark sides to human nature, where hell is always available to insert the rigidity in its attitudes into any crack in the United States of consciousness and change. The seventh of 12 stanzas in this Sermon for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, once upon a time, on the way to better days to come, yin-yang philosophy and psychology of consciousness and change is an approach to understanding the transpersonal dynamics that are involved in personal and collective human development, where it is common for confusion to be sustained through habitual dynamics of how customs and traditions can convey unconscious orientations to chaos, with the result being that every mood, person, group, direction, or identity out to seduce our allegiance requires being contemplated in terms of how life is a yin-yang experience of reciprocity between contrasting dimensions of change, and thereby history often occurs to be a contest between the virtues of heaven's better angels as opposed to the vices and conceptual devices of how hell misinterprets objectivity, in opposition to how common sense needs rationality to grow, so as to become aligned with how the holy nature of wisdom can change the world, but only consequent to individuals learning to see, feel, and care for the universe as the full measure of our personal identities. The eighth of 12 stanzas in this Sermon for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, once upon a time, consequent to how the character of all our decisions is always voting to elect creative or destructive tendencies in history, for the sake of better days to come, the viability of a democracy cannot be sustained without magnifying holistic common sense among its citizens, reflecting how through sage self-cultivation, the principle of universal creativity is always capable of transforming eternal manifestations of chaos, including how, in all social and political arenas, through timely education, the forces of our collective ignorance are destined to be transformed through the dynamics of working to make profound changes in who we become based on what we decide to learn, so as to wisely see how to be good for ourselves by becoming better for the world. Thereby, in nearby, intimate ways that virtues render reciprocal benefits to the evolution of global conflict resolution. Like David in his contest with Goliath, the transpersonal dynamics of moral creativity among individuals is how Mother Nature empowers human nature to conjure the dynamics of health throughout the biosphere, despite threatening powers and potentials of universal destruction. The ninth of 12 stanzas in this Sermon for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, once upon a time, before and after better days to come, wisdom is actual and potential reflections of how complementary stages of reciprocity in the nature of the cosmos transform universal dynamics of chaos. Thereby, consequent to the history of humanity at large being a function of the cosmos, sage self-cultivation among individuals is key to evoking, evolving, and aligning collective potentials for global conflict resolution within timeless orientations to how cosmic creativity in our perspectives and personalities is responsible for conjuring the hell out of history based on thinking and feeling so as not to become mired in mistaking arrested stages in human development for being trustworthy orientations to follow. The 10th of 12 stanzas in this sermon for peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, once upon a time, for the sake of better days to come, this contemplative sermon is offered for repeated listening, to inspire repeated discussions, for concentrating the dynamics of universal reciprocity into our perspectives, to the point that a critical mass of individuals learned to interpret commonplace experiences in terms of yin-yang symbols of cosmic reciprocity, at which point all the hard facts of existence can be seen as chapters of one story, eternally reflecting its cosmic origins, whereby moral heroism always thinks, cares, and acts for the destructive psychology of profoundly immature human development not to keep peace entrapped, and how hell deceives followers by means of leaders who themselves are morally lost, consequent to haplessly pledging allegiance to their forked tongues, rather than continually seeking the truth, 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 the 11th of 12 stanzas in this sermon for peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, once upon a time, nowadays and forever, as the creative dynamics of the universal principle of change become concentrated in our personalities, the character of wholly holistic reactions to chaos evokes and evolves multiple integral dimensions of conscious and unconscious dynamics for the evolution of peace, such as learning to believe that sanity is a path worth walking, and that the principal battle that we truly need to fight begins and ends with transforming ourselves under the leadership of profound ethical orientations for holistic self-governance, based on learning that the central meaning of our lives as individuals is to think and feel as a moral obligation for achieving discipline and balance between ways that our emotions and rational competencies need to cooperate rather than compete, within the context of how the yin-yang nature of life as a whole is always inherent in the United States of Consciousness and Change. Therefore, nowadays, as we deal with this or that candidate for political office, this or that man or woman, this or that army, this or that point of innocence or guilt, sanity or disorder. In the process of just being human, hope for progress toward global conflict resolution is always as near as the spiritual dynamics involved in our personal effects on the collective dynamics of change, and thereby consequent to unavoidable ways that individuals are responsible for the evolution of heaven or hell. The presence of health throughout the biosphere depends on holistic change becoming a common attribute of what it means to mature, consequent to learning to embrace life as a whole in the United States of consciousness and change. The 12th and final stanza of the Sermon for Peace in the United States of Consciousness and Change says, "Today is always better than tomorrow for assuming urgent responsibility, for saving the future from how the current and past history of humanity being mired in arrested stages of human development is antithetical to freedom, consequent to multiple forms of personal and cultural addictions, limiting us to only doing what chaos decides should be done. Therefore, once upon a time, in tandem with how universal creativity works through synchronicity, the growth of profound sobriety anywhere evokes potentials for sobriety to evolve everywhere. Consequent to how universal reciprocity between contrasting dimensions of change functions throughout the United States of consciousness and change, whereby, as the holy nature of wisdom conjures specific and general holistic reactions to chaos, the character of majestic human development can become so concentrated in our personalities that even among a minority of global citizens, the holy, holistic character of profound wisdom is such that it is a perennial mythic force, spiritually capable of evoking and evolving interlacing dynamics of peace, all based on how sincere change in any individual's personality works to aggregate all the virtues we collectively need to co-create a seemingly impossible era of heaven inhabiting the earth in the United States of consciousness and change, such that war is destined to become a relic of the future's past, consequent to how holy, holistic human development in the year 2024 constitutes the future, voting to elect wisdom today for the sake of better days to come. I am Reverend Gola Wolf-Richards from the Institute for Contemplative Education in Maine, online at broadcastwisdom.com. Speaking for years of collaboration with my dear friend and co-contemplator, Dr. Christopher Hunt, and all the directors at the Institute for Contemplative Education. We are honored to have your contemplative participation in our nonprofit educational missions for world peace, achieved through sage self-cultivation. With musical and production support from my son Ryan Richards and his wife Jessica Richards, from Dove Pax at DOVEPAX.com. Tax-deductible charitable support for our work is sincerely appreciated.